So welcome to the session 4B of the Digital Society Now conference of Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory. The title of this conference is New Realities. Our first speakers, our group of authors, Shuyun Liu, Luke Sloan, and Matthew Williams from School of Social Science, Cardiff University, and Tarek Al-Brahal and Paolo Sergio from Institute of Social and Economic Research, University of Essex. Title of their presentation is Exploring the Association among Different Types of Twitter Activity, Loneliness Level, and Life Satisfaction. Liu, you can share your screen and presentation.
Okay, so let's start. Hi, my name is Shujun Liu. I'm a research associate of Cardiff University, and I'm very honored to present a paper named That Social Media Make You Feel Lonely? Okay, sorry. Today I'm gonna present an article named That Social Media Make You Feel Lonely? Investigating the association among different types of Twitter activity, mental health, and loneliness. And this result is a part of ESRC project, Understanding Online and Offline Society, linking surveys with Twitter data. And this project is collaborated between Cardiff University, Essex University, and the Nathan Social Research. Now let's move to the introduction. People have been argued that social media use might affect our mental health and loneliness, but how social media use affect is still not quite clear. Some people think that social media use might decrease our loneliness because we have more connections, we have more platforms to connect and more opportunities to communicate with other people. And other people think that social media use might exacerbate our mental health and loneliness. The mixed results can be explained by two reasons. The first is that previous studies usually measure social media use with self-reported data, such as survey questions asking how often you use Twitter or Facebook. And the second reason is that many studies before used cross-sectional data. So the causal relationship between social media use and the psychological factors is not quite clear. And to overcome these mixed results, this study tries to link actual Twitter activities with survey data, hoping to solve the following questions. Whether different types of Twitter activity will lead to different outcomes about loneliness, and whether mental health will mediate the relationship between different types of Twitter activity and loneliness. And we also curious whether the demographic variables such as income, age, and marriage would moderate the relationship between different types of Twitter activity and mental health. And more specifically, we focus on two kinds of Twitter activity. The first kind we labeled as active activity, referring to the number of tweets with hashtag and the number of tweets with mentions. And the second type we labeled as passive activity, including the number of tweets with reply and the number of tweets with like. According to the research question, we proposed a hypothesis model. First, we proposed that active activity, including tweeting with hashtag and mention, might lead to higher degree of mental health and loneliness, as these people may have more appeals to express and hope to get more attention from other people. While passive activity, referring to receiving reply and like, might cause lower level of mental health and loneliness, as these people have obtained responses and supports from other netizens. And it was noting in this model that Twitter activities were measured from 10.1 to 10.2, while mental health, loneliness, and the demographic variables were measured at 10.2. And to test the hypothesis, this study used data set from UK Understanding Society Innovation Panel. This is a national representative data set. And Twitter data was collected from Wave 10 in June 2017. 3 questions were asked in Wave 10 to obtain their agreement to disclose their Twitter account, including, do you have a personal Twitter account? Do you consent to link Twitter to survey? And what's your Twitter's username? After that, we use retweet package in R to retrieve respondents' metadata, including their number of tweets with hashtag, with mentions, reply, and liked from June 27th of 2017 to June 27th of 2018, up to 1 year before the survey fieldwork of Wave 11. 88 respondents' tweet information were retrieved finally after excluding the non-public account. And the survey data was obtained from Wave 11 of Understanding Society Innovation Panel. 6 items borrowed from a GHQ scale were used to measure mental health. 4 items were used to measure loneliness. CF3 results suggested that these items can form a unidimensional factor. We also use the variable of age, income, and marriage as moderators in the model. After merging Twitter data with survey data, 70 simple finally remained. And regarding the data analysis technique, mediation hypothesis was tested using structural equation modeling, and potential moderating effects was tested using process analysis. And the results of SEM show that more tweets with hashtag and receiving like, the less likely the respondent would feel alone. In other words, posting hashtag and receiving like will decrease people's loneliness directly. This supports our hypothesis about receiving like, but reject the hypothesis about hashtag posting. Meanwhile, we found that tweet posting with hashtag would result in loneliness only when their mental health was harmed. Thus, mental health can mediate the relationship between hashtag posting and the sense of loneliness. In addition to that, posting tweets with mention or receiving reply will not affect one's mental health and loneliness in our results. Regarding the moderating effects between Twitter use and the mental health, no significant results existed regarding the factor of income as well as the factor of age. However, we found that the marriage can moderate the relationship between hashtag posting and mental health. And in specific, for single people, more tweets with hashtag will lead to higher level of mental issue, where the results do not apply to people who are in a marriage or in a separated relationship. In sum, this study found that Twitter use, in particular the employment of hashtag
Leo, we cannot hear you. Your screen is frozen.
worsen.
Can you hear us?
Overall, this study tries to link actual Twitter activities with their survey responses to better comprehend which types of Twitter use would more likely to affect one's mental health and loneliness. And this study used longitudinal data to better disentangle the causal relationship between Twitter use and mental health. And as far as we know, this study is the first one trying to examine the relationship between actual Twitter use and the psychological fluctuations. Despite this study has some limitations. First is that due to the relative low consent rate to disclose Twitter account, the sample size is small and might affect the statistical power. And the second is that despite we use longitudinal data, the time period is still short, around 1 year, and may not sufficient to explain the causal relationship. And at last, this study is kind of a pilot study. We are currently collecting more responses who are willing to disclose their Twitter account. So please contact us if you have any interest in linking Twitter data with survey data. And thanks for listening.
Very much for your presentation. Our next presenter is Oliver Tošković from Department of Psychology, University of Belgrade, with the title of presentation, Perceived Distance Anisotropy in Virtual Reality. Oliver,
do you hear me? I'm here on this favor. Well, until my presentation opens, to state that my background is psychology and visual perception in more details. But I will try to tell you something about my research on the perception of space and how it is mapped to the virtual realities. That's why here you can see the image of Euclid about the distance, about the geometry of space and the virtual reality in some sense. So when I'm talking about these weird words like anisotropy, I will try to explain it in my typical experiment, which I'm doing in real reality or so-called physical reality. My typical experiment looks something like this. I have around 15 students as a participant, and they usually sit in this comfortable position. It looks like a low-cost experiment, it is. What is their task? It's usually a huge dark room. Participants would estimate distances of small dim lights in different directions. So when I'm talking about the anisotropy, I'm actually referring to the changes in perceived distance in different directions around us. So what would be the task for the participants? To notice the distance of this dim light, which is on a certain distance from her, and then to tell me to move the other one closer or further away from her until she feels as they are at the same distance from her. So she would equalize the distances from her in space on different directions, like horizontal and vertical. Why the dark room? Because we usually perceive distances based on various information in surroundings, like perspective, other objects. And in order to equalize those information on all directions, I turn the light off. So it's kind of it's called a low Q situation or reduced Q situation. Typical finding that I'm getting in my research looks like this. So if you would compare different horizontal and vertical distances, like for instance, if the stimuli, the lights are on 1 meter, on 3, or on 5, the blue line, there is a tendency of participants to match them this way. They tend to match shorter vertical, for instance, like 3 meters on vertical with almost 6 meters on horizontal. So what does this mean? It means that 3 meters above them, they perceive as 6 meters in front of them. So if they tend to see 3 meters above them as same as 6, it means that they perceive these 3 meters above them as longer because they equalize them with 6. Why? My idea was that this kind of an overestimation of distances above them is related to the multisensory perception or combination of our visual information with information about the position of the body and the head. So if you are like looking above, you're changing the position of the body and the head, and those information interact and elongate the distances above us. Why? My idea is that I call this taking effort into account hypothesis, because there is this kind of a specific shape of our space. It's elongated above us, which actually helps us to perform actions. How does it help us? I use this image. This is the Nirvana album 20 years later. This baby from Nirvana, Nevermind, grew up and sued Nirvana to give him the money back. So if you would like to imagine this not anymore little kid reaching for something which is in front of him, so on horizontal direction, it would require a certain effort in hands because the gravity and the muscles he's using kind of work in different directions, and it would require certain effort. But if the money is above him, he would reach for the money above him, and reaching the money above him is directly opposing gravity. He's using the different types of muscles, and this direction action requires more effort. So if it requires more effort, it actually means that this model of space, which says to his mind, up is more distant, it would actually help him perform action, because if up is at a larger distance that we perceive than it is, then we would actually put more effort into it. So kind of a basic idea behind is that the perceived distances are not designed in such a way that we perceive them precisely, but to perceive them in line with our effort needed to perform action. If we need more effort on vertical, our visual system would elongate that distance, signaling to our brain that we need more effort for that. So this is my kind of idea and model. And what about virtual reality? Why is virtual reality important? Because it's a different kind of space in one sense, and in other sense, we do not perform actions in this space yet, at least not directly. So what are the aims of this study that I'm presenting here? Is there this kind of a tendency, this anisotropy difference in perceived distances in virtual reality? Do they change if we add more information about the distance? Remember, I did my research in the dark without almost any or a small number of this information. And does it change for something what you call appetitive and aversive stimuli? You will see what is it at the end. So what does the first experiment look like? It's actually similar to the one that I showed you, just in virtual reality. It looks more cozy because the participant is sitting at the table and just touching the keyboard and wearing Oculus Rift glasses. So what is actually she looking at? She's just looking at a sphere, a red sphere, and this red sphere can be on 3 different distances from her, 1, 3, and 5 meters. This is the standard distances which I'm using in my research. They are programmed now in virtual reality, and she's looking 2 spheres, one on horizontal, the other one on vertical distance above her. And I'm actually placing this one, for instance, on 3 meters. She doesn't know that. And her task is to move the one up closer and further until she perceives them as on the same distance from her and this one horizontal, and vice versa. She's now looking up and adjusting the horizontal one. I'm having just these 3 distances as controls, and approximately I have 17 students for this research. What are the results like? If you remember my typical finding, these results actually resemble this typical finding. Differences are a bit smaller, but statistics says that they are statistically significant. These yellow arrows show that it is statistically significant difference, with meaning that there is a similar tendency like in physical reality. Shorter vertical are matched to longer horizontal, even on 1, on 3, or on 5 meters. So even in close and farther space, people tend to overestimate vertical distances. They perceive them as larger. Why they perceive them as larger once again? Because they see 3 meters the same as 5. So it means it's perceived as large. What is the second experiment? So I did the same thing with 17 psychology students, similar situation, just she's looking up now during the photograph, and she also looked in front of her, but the only change that I did now is that the sphere is now shown behind the brick wall. Why the brick wall? The brick wall is good because it has a lot of information about the distance. It can produce it with perspective, the size of element, something which is called the texture gradient. So now the distance perception can be more precise than in the dark. In the previous experiment, she just saw a red sphere in the dark. Now she just sees a red sphere next to the brick wall behind her and the same brick wall in front of her. This is the good thing for me in virtual reality because I can program this. In real reality, I would have to build a room with the same brick walls on the floor and on the wall behind. What are the results? They are actually the same. Exactly the same graph when you have the brick wall or you don't. So I'm actually finding the same thing with or without the additional information. So whether we use the experiment in the dark or with the ground or the brick wall, without or with a lot of information about the distance, we are getting the same results, meaning that our visual system overestimates vertical distance. Because my basic idea that it has something to do with putting effort in our actions, like this kind of enables our efforts to be easier or to easily grasp something. The idea which was behind it what if the objects whose distance I'm estimating would be dangerous or a tasty one? That's why I'm calling this experiment snakes and cakes. Instead of looking at the two spheres, the participants would look at this, I think it's a bush viper, or it's a really dangerous snake, but not only dangerous, it looks dangerous. And this is quite a tasty cake. So they would actually, instead of looking at two red balls, they would look at the cute cake and even cuter snake. So what are the results now when they are estimated? The task is the same, just estimate the distance until they look the same far away as the one on the horizontal. So for the cakes, you see the results are similar, but the thing is that for the snakes, nothing changes actually. If they are matching the distances of the cakes or the snakes, we still get almost the same tendency before. So this is what I call appetitive and aversive stimuli. Regardless of whether you are judging something which is neutral, like a red sphere, or something dangerous, snake, or something tasty, like a cake, your effort needs to be larger, whether you're depending on something or reaching something. And that's why the results probably stay the same. So we can actually map the same model of space for the snakes and cakes over estimation of vertical distances. And to conclude, so actually what we've shown here is that this effect appears also in virtual reality. Vertical distances are perceived as larger. It doesn't change if we add more information about the distance, if it's more precise when I add a brick wall, and it does not depend is it appetitive or aversive stimuli. So results are actually congruent with my hypothesis on taking effort into account during the distance estimation, and I will leave you with the how to dive, and thank you for your enjoyment.
Thank you, Oliver, for this stimulating and interesting presentation and research topic. Our next participants is also a group of authors, Bojana Dimic and Tamara Jovanovic from Department of Psychology, Faculty of Philosophy, University of Novi Sad, Bojana Borodja from Department of Geography, Tourism and Hotel Management, Faculty of Science, University of Novi Sad, and Darko Hinic from Faculty of Science, University of Kragujevac, with the title of presentation, Effects of Individual and Social Factors on Social Media Addiction among Adolescents in Serbia.
Yes, could I start?
We can see your presentation, you can start.
Okay. Thank you very much, and I'm very glad to meeting you here online, unfortunately, but I hope that there will be opportunities for meeting in vivo. Our group study explored effects of individual and social factors on social media addiction among adolescents in Serbia. The use of modern technologies such as social media and video games has become an increasingly studied area over the last decade. Although this technology has been associated with many positive aspects, concerns have been raised regarding excessive use, in particular the potential of users becoming addicted to such technologies. First, I'm going to explain what social media addiction is. It is defined as being overly concerned about online activities driven by an uncontrollable motivation to perform the behavior and devoting so much time and effort to it that it impairs other important life areas. Social media excessive use becomes an addiction when several criteria are met. These criteria are, you could see the 6 of them, for example, a preoccupation with the behavior, increased engagement, discomfort when the behavior is reduced, and similar. So when a person manifests all of these 6 behaviors, we could talk about social media addiction. If these behaviors are not expressed in an extremely way, then we talk about excessive social media use. So the question is, how severe is social media addiction? According to one study on over 22,000 adults, it is the prevalence of social media addiction is 30.5%. However, on adolescents, the prevalence is somewhat smaller and ranged between 1 and 11%, except in China and Japan, in which the prevalence is somewhat higher. In Serbia, the prevalence was 10.6% of adolescents, but it is important to note that this study was conducted during the pandemic when schools had operated online and when adolescents were more into online technologies during online classes and similar. So there are higher use of online technologies in the period when this research was conducted. In this study, we have explored factors of social media addiction, and actually of both social media addiction and excessive use of social media. For investigation of the most important factors, we use socio-ecological model. This model considers the complex interplay between a microsystem, which includes individual factors, then meso, exo, and microsystems, which includes relationship, community, and societal factors. The most important factors are from the micro and mesosystem. Compared to previous research and studies in this area, in which only factors from one system were investigated, in this research, we included relevant factors from both micro and mesosystem. The first level, the microsystem, identifies all biological personal history factors and non-individual factors that could increase or decrease the likelihood of social media addiction or excessive use of social media. Some of these factors are gender, age, and self-esteem, and previous studies showed that social media addiction is higher among females, younger adults or adolescents, and those with lower self-esteem. The second level is the mesosystem, and it identifies close relationships that may increase or decrease the risk of social media addiction. In this study, adolescents' closest social circles were explored, relationship with peers, the role of parents, and the role of close settings such as school. Previous research found inconsistent effects of peer support. However, peers are more important social group in adolescents compared to, for example, parents, even more important than parents. So we included perception of peers in this research, along with the role of parents in school in as potential risk or protective factors of social media addiction. In contrast to the role of peers, in most of previous research, there is an agreement that family and school support showed negative effects on social media addiction, especially parental mediation. So we expect to have negative effects of peers, parental, and school support in this study. The sample included 180 high school students, ages 16 to 19. Data was collected from April to June in 2021, when online or combined classes were organized during the pandemic. We applied several scales, for example, Bergen social media addiction scale for measurement of social media addiction, then Rosenberg's self-esteem scale, generalized perception of peers, which measure how adolescents see their peers in a negative or positive way, parental mediation and control, and school climate, perception of school climate. first, we explore how severe is social media addiction. Compared to our previous research in 2020, the overall mean on social media addiction scale was lower, and there are significant differences between these two samples. However, the prevalence of social media addiction is higher compared to previous year, actually compared to 2020. Thus, it seems that excessive use slightly decrease after the pandemic, but addiction slightly increase. However, these results should be taken with caution since longitudinal design was not applied here. In the next analysis, we will only use score of scale on measure of social media addiction as a measure of excessive use of social media. So excessive use of social media significantly correlate with having an account on several social media networks, Snapchat, TikTok, and YouTube. So although a number of accounts of social media networks correlate with excessive social media use, this having an account of these three social networks would be considered as risk factors for excessive use of social media. Then, to explore the effects of individual and social factors on excessive use of social media, we conducted hierarchical regression analysis. In the first step, we included individual factors from the microsystem. Results showed that female gender and lower self-esteem are predictors of excessive use of social media. Then, in the second step, we included generalized perception of peers, and these factors show non-significant, but somebody would say marginal significant expected negative effects. So the negative perception of peers predicted higher excessive use of social media. In the third step, we included parental variables, of which only parental mediation showed significant effects, but surprisingly positive. This is unexpected results and could be explained as parents becoming more involved when adolescents have already shown signs of excessive use of social media. And in the final fourth step, we included school climate, and however, these factors show no significant effects of excessive social media use. So in conclusion, we could say that individual factors are the most important one, especially self-esteem followed by gender, and additional role could have parental mediation and peer support. So when it comes to adolescence, social media often makes someone's life looks much more exciting, which is mostly not accurate. This can deteriorate one's sense of social competitiveness and belonging. Thus, the results of this study support the importance of adequate prevention through boosting self-esteem, social skills, and effective coping strategies. Those can help overcome social risks, feeling of inadequacy and not interesting enough, and ultimately overcome social media addiction. Finally, I would recommend the Guide for Prevention of Risky Use of Social Media Among Adolescents, in which we gave tips, examples, and practical guidelines for teachers, parents, and adolescents in order to prevent excessive use of social media and other online risky behaviors. It is in Serbian for now, and it is in open domain and could be downloaded. Thank you very much for your attention.
Problems during. Okay.
I can solve that. So the rollout of 5G technology raises a host of issues that are currently being ignored or undervalued by both state and non-state private actors. Electromagnetic radiation can be categorized into two types of radiation, ionizing and non-ionizing, as you can see from this scale. Ionizing radiation is known to have effects on human health, and it's the stronger of the two types. An easy example of ionizing radiation would be something like an X-ray machine, and something moderate could be a sun tanning bed, and then on the lower end, we have Wi-Fi and mobile phones. The key issue that comes up when living in a world where we're surrounded by devices that emit electromagnetic frequencies is how does the use of these devices and exposures impact human health, including our core biological and reproductive functions. So the origins of this research and my introduction to this issue was when I was a graduate student at the American University of Paris. Two of my co-authors, Claudia Roda and Susan Perry, had published an article in 2013 that argued the precautionary principle should be used in the difficulties regulating electromagnetic fields. They argue that vulnerable populations need to be protected under this principle, which stipulates that where there is uncertainty in scientific evidence, precautionary measures should be taken to protect people. So after reading their article, which primarily focuses on children's health and the impact on young people with EMF, I was particularly interested in whether EMF can have an impact on women's health and the gendered lens. So when I started my research, I came upon one article that you see on the screen, which is about breast cancer. These researchers concluded that exposure to radio frequency does impact breast cancer, and I was particularly interested in this. Unfortunately, this article presents a clear case study in the challenges of researching this issue. A few months after their publication, the article was retracted from the journal after complaints from stakeholders, and this demonstrates the Sisyphean task of questioning a ubiquitous technology that's worth trillions of dollars in the global economy. After the retraction of this article, I began my own informal meta-study to try to find data linking the impacts of EMF in human health. I found 99 studies that were published in the EMF portal between 2017 and 2021. This is an open database that publishes all of the research that's done on EMF. So in the graph on the right, you can see those studies in light blue, which conclude there is an effect from EMF. Those in white, which say there's no effect, and those in dark blue, which say there's more research. So the majority of the data is pointing to the fact that there is an effect on human health. If you look in the graph on the left, you will see the type of effect that was studied among all of these 99 studies. And the vast majority of the investigations were looking into cancer. In my research, I also found that the International Agency for Research on Cancer published in 2020 that breast cancer has passed lung cancer as the world's most commonly diagnosed cancer. This is a particularly gendered issue because women make up the vast majority of all breast cancer patients worldwide. This is a significant human rights concern because gender is at the forefront of this issue, and there is currently a lack of significant data to be able to. The difficulties that remain for myself and my co-authors is being able to tie the rise of global breast cancer cases to the rise of electromagnetic frequencies. Returning to the 99 articles I studied, 96.8 of them were gender neutral, which means they studied male patients, and only 3.2% of them were gendered and looked at impacts on women. This is a clearly representative case of the dominant epidemiological paradigm, where the lack of gender-specific research demonstrates the normative underpinnings of science. This investment and study is biased towards the male body, and we argue in our article that the dominant epidemiological paradigm is the main constitutive element behind the lack of study on women and their impact from EMF. So we argue in our paper that a correlation could be found between the rise in breast cancer cases and the rise in EMF. We suggest that the lack of data in and of itself is a possible violation of the European Union Human Rights Framework, and we recommend expanded, robustly funded, and standardized study in order to determine whether and to what extent EMF emissions may be a contributing factor to breast cancer. In the framework of the law, the European Union's adoption of a risk-based approach, rather than utilizing the existing binding human rights framework to address the possible impacts of EMS on women's health, constitutes a lower standard of protection which may be discriminatory. The European Union has been calling for more research into the impact of EMS on human health through its Horizon Europe initiative. The language of this initiative asks for a three-step hazard and risk evaluation in which they first look at the existing or potential hazard, then look for appropriate research to determine the level of that risk, and finally, they adopt measures to control the risk. The European Commission has done steps 1 and 2 from that framework, but has failed to go through with the third step and pass binding measures that could protect human health. We conclude that EMS thresholds and protection for human health should be legislated through binding measures under the framework of the precautionary principle. We also conclude that there is a need for greater understanding and transparency. This would be achieved by regulators publishing standardized data and also investigating the gender-specific impacts of EMS. In order to rectify the dearth of gender-specific study and possibly protect women from the discrimination that they would be facing if EMS is indeed impacting the rising breast cancer cases. This article will be published in 2023 under my name and my co-authors, Susan Perry, Claudia Rhoda, and Nicole Santiago. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sienna, for excellent lecture and a very important topic for your presentation. And now we will have a chance to hear our last but not least presenter for this day and this panel, Jelena Pantovic from Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory, University of Belgrade, with the title of presentation, The Business of Umbilical Cord, Biobanking in Serbia, Biocapitalism and Symbolic Geographies of Health. Awesome.
Thanks, Anna. It's been a long day, so I'll try to keep it short, definitely shorter than my title. So let's see if this clicker thing works. So just to rephrase again, I mean, essentially, this is something, this is a topic that is of side interest, is a side interest of mine. I'm a medical anthropologist interested in reproductive health. And for my PhD, I looked at maternal health care in Serbia. I spent a couple of months attending different birthing classes, both public and private ones. Public meaning they belong to the public healthcare system, private ones outside of the healthcare system. And biobanking became a very key term that I became familiar with as I was attending these classes, which I was, in my head, I assumed would only mostly be about what to do and how to prepare to give birth to your child. So this was really, really interesting for me. And it's something that sort of has been in my sidelines. I don't know if you have that folder in your computer, but interesting topic that I would like to explore further if I have the time. So please take that into consideration when presenting this. So this is a work in progress paper that hopefully I will have time to finish. So maybe before that, just to give a quick definition of what is umbilical cord biobanking, or use the shorthand UCB. So UCB is actually not a fairly recent phenomenon. If you look at it, it's started in the early 1990s, and it entails the storage of stem cells from post-birth umbilical cord blood, so UCB, either for research or personal medical purposes. And when I mentioned there are private and public classes, so there are also private and public biobanks. What is the difference between the two? Public biobanks are based on voluntary donations and distributing umbilical cord blood for medical needs, while private biobanks collect and store UCB for a fee, and their individual cord bloods used for their own medical needs. So there's growing scholarship on UCB, especially in medical anthropology. However, the majority of literature focuses on what we would call biocapitalism in advanced societies, while little research actually questions the emergence of UCB biobanking in spaces such as Serbia, that is in sort of this post-socialist context. So what was the aim, or what is the aim of this research that I intend to actually complete and finish and maybe publish somewhere? So I wanted to understand how private biobanking, because currently in Serbia there are no public biobanks, there are promises, but those promises are as old as biobanking. So biobanking is a form of biocapital, and that is taking shape in post-socialist Serbia. And what different kinds of entanglements can we trace in this post-socialist context that may not be visible in the advanced capitalism? So the methodology, as I said, it's essentially data that I collected on the side while I was doing my PhD research. So data collection was ethnographic during the period 2016-2017. It includes 6 in-depth interviews with then pregnant women talking about their attitudes towards UCB biobanking. And I also spoke to 2 biobank representatives in Serbia. I collected additional data on biobanking online for different forums and Facebook groups where women discuss this topic at length. In regards to the term biotechnology, I think it's really interesting to talk about it in this case now. Let me go back to this. So from the second half of the 20th century, we can map the rise and development of new forms of technologies, right? Biotechnologies that put into question the key notions and ways we understand life, nature, and what is changeable and unchangeable by humans. This new form of technology has been described by theorists of science and technology studies as emerging science. And I think that's really apt for the conference now. That's why I took this unfinished research for this presentation. So what does this mean? This means that there is no unified understanding of what are the dangers and benefits of these new forms of technologies. What is important to point out is that this uncertainty surrounding biotechnology doesn't arise only because of the technology and the science, presenting technology and science as somehow outside of culture and outside of the socio-political realm. On the contrary, the social is actually crucial and a crucial part of it. So biotechnologies are shaped by the current political and cultural frameworks, and that they in turn, these political and cultural frameworks shape our understandings of technology. So this is where I was sort of trying to understand how biobanking is taking place in Serbia. In that sense, I draw on Catherine Walby's and Herschel's concept of biocapitalism, which is this process of inserting capitalist market values into biological substances, such as tissues, organs, stem cells, through technological processes. Hermlich argues that biocapital and biocapitalism builds on Foucault's notion of biopower to include governance of cells, molecules, genomes, and genes. And he defined biocapital as the contemporary unions of biological science with profit-oriented enterprise. Specifically, biocapital is a kind of novel capital that inserts stem cells and genomes into projects of product making and for profit seeking. So private biobanking of human tissues and the faith in the regenerating powers of stem cells is becoming a central topic for understanding biotechnologies of human life. So umbilical cords. Previously, well, we can discuss umbilical cords using Koptov's notion of waste. So they've become something of bio waste that's usually disregarded in medical settings to a form of what now I understand as biocapital, something that can be seen as having a value in the marketplace. So something that was previously thrown away now has from a singularized waste, right, turned to something that is actually quite valuable. And Walby even talks about this as a form of biocapital. So how does this become valuable? Well, through biobanking. So with the possibility of cryopreserving and storing cord blood for further clinical research and medical treatments, essentially we're taking cord blood and putting it outside of time in both a biological and historical sense so that it can be used for a later date. I already described a couple of different types of biobanks. So the key point here is that in Serbia, there actually are no biobanks working within the grounds of Serbia. You have representatives of private biobanks working in various parts of the world. So if you store cord blood, you take cord blood during childbirth, it is actually transported usually via DHL to different biobanking institutions across Europe or even further abroad. Walby and Mitchell have extensively studied biobanking, especially UCB core biobanking in what we would call advanced biocapitalism, and they call it biological investment. So investing into the future health of your child. Actually, it's at a later date, they actually talked about it as a form of biological venture capital. So this is the sort of, is it an investment or is it a form of venture capital, right? A type of risk-seeking capitalist notion that we're dealing with. So this is the larger context when we talk about it in the West, but what does it look like when we talk about it in the Serbian context? So when I talked to the different women and I looked at all these forums and I looked at the news that talked about biobanking, a key question emerged that was really sort of actually at the center of my own research, which was the trust or distrust in the current healthcare system in Serbia. So, for example, this was back in 2015, a newspaper, Danas, wrote, Serbia is in dire need of a public UCB bank because there's potential savior from the gravest diseases. So there is an understanding, even in the dominant media, that this was something that would be a positive thing to have. So this is a quote from one of the mothers that I spoke to. So she was pregnant at the time, she's 25. I was at the Mother and Child Institute, which is here in Belgrade. And I passed by the oncology and radiology wing, and I saw hallways full and floors packed with emaciated children with no hair. What type of cancer happens? When that type of cancer happens to someone, there is no chance. They can't beat it. This is sadly our postnatal reality. Then you really get scared because you have a small child and you want another soon. I'm certainly saving money for stem cells. It's a great investment. So I use this quote. Can be unpacked in various ways, but for this one specifically, you can see her talking about storing cord blood as a type of investment. So this directly links to this idea that Walby was talking about, the perception of umbilical cord biobanking as a form of bioinvestment, investment into the future health of the child. But specifically, so this is what I was interested in analyzing further, is how the history, the political context, the fact of living, the reality of living in Serbia is shaping her decisions into what kinds of investments she wants to make for her child. So what is the price of pricelessness then? Right? How does this practice look? What does this look in practice? To give you a sense, cord blood storage is around between 2,000 and 3,000 euros, and the average paycheck officially is around 500 euros. So this is not a cheap or an easy decision to make, and not a lot of people actually make it. I don't actually have the data on that, but that would be really interesting to see. Even the women that I spoke to were debating about it, but this was the discussion, like, should I invest into the health of my child? What is the price of pricelessness? And I think one mother who was a first-time mom summed it up great. What do you have after wedding pictures, memories? You spend a lot of money. What happens if you don't invest in cord blood and your child gets sick? The child dies. Some things are priceless. I would sell my kidney on the black market if need be for my child's health. So this was her discussion about the costs of weddings, because weddings tend to typically cost between 2,000 and 3,000 euros. And for her, this was a debate in her mind, whether she should have an extravagant wedding or store cord blood. And this idea of even selling other body parts, it's a phrase more commonly used here in Serbia. If you want something, you would sell your body parts for it. Talks a lot about the ways in which we see our own bodies as a form of something that we could be traded on in a market space. So this is a changing dynamic that's really interesting to explore further. But what I'm interested specifically here is, as I mentioned, there are no private biobanks in Serbia. So aside from all this gambit of different metaphors and symbols that are going around about what the precarity of life in Serbia and the need to invest in the future health of one's child, the question becomes where to invest. And here is where we can note different symbolic geographies, right? The ideas and images of different sites across the world where things are perceived as better or safer. So one of the women I spoke to, she was debating, she decided she does want to store cord blood. She's debating on where to do it, Poland or Germany. And her answer was, I'm more trusting of the biomedical centers in Germany. After all, we all know what Germany is. And for a larger paper, I was looking into how these biobanks are actually presenting themselves here in Serbia. And the key thing that they're also playing on is the symbolic geography. The Swiss biobanks actually call themselves Swiss banks. So, and they're really capitalizing on the notion of the symbolic geography of the Switzerland as the safe haven for banking and places of security. What is interesting is that one of these biobanks actually failed, and a lot of people had backlash from it. So it's really a form of more, as I said, venture capitalism or bio-venture capitalism than it is an investment. But private biobanking is something that I think should be explored further, and definitely not as a side project, but of bigger concerns. So because it puts faith in the regenerative powers of stem cells, it's becoming a key topic in understanding biotechnologies of human life. Thank you for listening to my scattered thoughts on this topic, and thanks so much.
We're back. Thank you, Liana, for your presentation. And now I would like to open the discussion. If anybody has any question, in person, online, okay, we have one.
Does this work now? Oh, yes, great. Sienna, I had a question for you, actually. You were highly critical of the EU for taking a risk-based approach versus a human rights-based approach for EMFs. And I was just wondering from you why a human rights-based approach is the better pathway to take for something like this when the risks haven't been proven to necessarily exist as of yet.
So I think
with the red, good now? Okay. I think when you look at it, the human rights framework is more binding, whereas if you have just a risk approach that is between state and private actors, you don't really have firm safeguards in place. But if you look into the human rights system, there are courts to be taken to, there are lots of different measures that one has to fall back on. Whereas if you're completely looking to private industry to protect people, you're putting all of the responsibility on the polluter themselves. So I think that there's not a lot of fundamental impetus for them to do the right thing.
Okay. Yes.
Are you with?
We can see you online.
Do you hear me?
Hello. I was just wondering, you showed a really nice model of predicting the loneliness with the mediation of the mental health. I was more thinking about the conceptual level. It's hard for me to imagine that like behavior on Twitter or on networks kind of influence loneliness. Did you try to test the reverse order of prediction? From my point of view, it would seem that like somebody who is lonely has a need to put more content on the Twitter or something.
Shoyon, just turn your microphone on, please. Unmute yourself.
Sorry, I just thought your microphone is not on, so I cannot hear quite clear. So could you please repeat the question? Sorry. Sorry, I have to interrupt. The connection is not quite stable for this one. Maybe for the host one is better, I think. Sorry.
Like this?
Yeah, this is better. Yeah.
Okay, so I showed a nice model of prediction of loneliness based on someone's behavior on social networks. But I was wondering, can we turn the picture on different directions? So did you try to test the model? Is like the real cause someone's loneliness and the state of mental health? Which are the causes of someone's behavior on the Twitter? Did you try just to test the reverse model in structural equationing?
No, we have not examined the reverse causal relationship between that is whether the mental health will affect their social media use. But I think it's worth quite well to do this analysis to examine the causal reverse relationship. Yeah.
I'll ask a question for Olivier. Your hypothesis is that the different perception of distance is based on effort, which makes sense. Normally, from other experiments, our perceptual system adapts quite quickly to changes. So I was wondering whether you thought about trying what happens if you repeat with some sort of feedback, positive or negative, if you repeat the experiment several times in the 3D environment and see whether with time it changes.
Thanks for the question. It's actually excellent way of thinking. We had a lot of thoughts about it, and we tried in several ways. We didn't try to repeat it as an experiment on the same subject, but our subject in the same experiments do their estimates several times. Some of the experiments last for half an hour. But not only that, we actually try to kind of adapt them to the situation in the sense that we tried, we gave them like darts, the game, and they would like to try to hit the target, which was above them and in front of them. Actually, to make them practice their preciseness on a certain distance. And we actually then tested their perception of distance after practicing playing darts, and it didn't affect them. We also tried to put them weights on hand wrists and on their legs. Why hand wrists? Because this is the way we put more effort on the hand. And we actually tried to reverse the situation, to put the weight on the hand on horizontal direction. They would move the stimuli with their hand in real life, not in virtual reality, and to loosen up the other hand. So this one would require more effort, but it also didn't have any effects. We also tried to make them feel tired with their hands. They would lift weights for about 10 minutes and then to do the experiment, and it showed no effects. So all these results taken together actually make me a bit happy, because it seems that like this model is more into our visual system and it's not so easily changeable. It's kind of a stable heuristic, which might change if we would spend a longer time in the changed circumstances, like if you're astronaut. That's why I have a small picture of astronauts on my first slide. So if they spend more time there with the gravity loosen up and stuff, this might affect, but short-term real-time changes just won't affect. And this is the main difference between me and the findings of my more famous colleague, Profit from the States, who actually found this, that the people tend to overestimate distances or the slopes if they wear a backpack. But his findings are heavily criticized because it turns out that when you tell to the people what is in the backpack, they just lose the differences. It's kind of the knowledge of the people why they are doing something changes these short-term effects. But in my experiments, it shows that knowledge or even practice doesn't change them, which actually shows that this effect is probably some deeper sense of it. That's why I call it heuristic. I'm not sure, are we born with it or do we practice it during the childbirth? I don't think that many parents would give me their kids to do this. So far I have just one, but my wife would kill me. So it's, thanks for the question. It was great.
I have a conversation with you, a question for you, excuse me. I think the stem cell conversation is fascinating, twofold. Do you have any sort of guesstimate on what it costs to get one of these banks up and running, and then what it costs to maintain it as people come in and donate? And then secondly, do you believe in the private markets and their ability to get this up and running? Or do you see this as something that needs to be government subsidized and tax-based? Thank you.
Great conversation starter. First of all, let's start with the easier one, the second one. I think it adheres to the question you posed as well. So actually, for example, France has completely banned the use of private biobanking, and it only works for public biobanking, meaning that it's donation-based, open to everyone, for use of science and for use in need if someone actually needs, for example, stem cells in direct treatment. So it's more leaning towards actually having public biobanks. A similar discussion about with biobanking is blood banks. So you have public blood banks that are available for everyone's use. You donate blood and you can use it if you need it in any hospital setting. So the thing with stem cells is that actually their benefit for society as a whole is in the research. The issue with private biobanking, and specifically the issue with Serbia, I think it would be impossible at this point. I don't really, the number I can't give it to you off the top of my head, but they are very, very expensive to set up and run. They require technology. You would have legal issues here in Serbia as well. And there's a whole strand of legal changes that had to be made in order for you to actually take this tissue outside of Serbia and store it in Germany or somewhere else. So there's a lot of legislature that's being changed right now, especially in other aspects. So I think currently the Serbian government is very keen on making these changes and making private biobanks, making this a market where they could actually build up biobanks cheaper. But I can't, that's just a discussion that I'm guessing based on what are the discussions here in it's called the current political climate, which is a very interesting question to pose if you're making private biobanks that are more available. So that's the standard of it. How are things going to be functioning actually? So that's, I think it's a conversation, right? But the issue here and now in Serbia is that you don't have them, you don't have public ones, you don't have private ones. So it's more on the imaginary, on you perceiving where the cord blood is going to be stored, and on the desire and the hope, that's why I use the word hope, that if needed, it will be available for the treatment of your child specifically. So this is sort of this debate between the public and the private, is that the private ones are for personal use only, rather than the public, which is open for donation and further research. But can I ask a question? So what about, have you thought about like in getting, I don't know, cohorts of 7-year-olds or 7-year-olds before they start school in the perception tests?
Yeah, thanks for this. We tried that. 2 of my master students actually did it, and we get the similar effects for the preschool students. We even tried with the 4-year-olds, but it was a disaster because we kind of get them into the experiment saying we will play a funny video game, which turned out to be extremely non-funny because it's just a red sphere, you know, and after like 30 seconds, they would take the VR off their head and say, what's funny? So they just said, I don't want to play. So we actually, it takes at least like 10 minutes for this kind of experiment. 30 seconds is insufficient, but the 7-year-olds and 9-year-olds did it, and it was the same effect. Actually, if something happens, I would expect to happen in the first 2 years, because later on it's too late for the perception. Perception system is already stable after the 3 or 4. Most research in the distance perception actually took place with animals. It's just like chickens who just went out of the egg, just hatched, or with the cats who are just born and they would raise them in the dark for a few weeks. So this is the timeline, like first year or first 2. Afterwards, it's too late, and it even doesn't work before 7. But it's a good idea. I would love to do it.
Any more questions, conversations? No? Okay, I want to thank all participants for a fantastic session. And I also want to invite you in person or in line to join us tomorrow at the second day of eMERGE conference. For online participants, you can find the Zoom links on the site of the conference. Thank you once again.
Thank you.